Erev Tov to everybody. We want to thank, first of all, Colin Franco for sponsoring this Dvar Torah. It's in the honor of his parents, Yortzats. First of all, his mother, Irma Franco, Miriam Bater, Zichrona Livracha, and his father, Ernest Franco, Aaron Ben Dov, Zichrona Livracha, that both of them should have Aliyah Began Eden. The Torah in Parshat Behar speaks about our attitude and the way that we have to treat servants, Hebrew servants, which obviously doesn't apply today because the whole institution of servants, as we know it, only applied when there was Shemitah and Yovel, but it doesn't apply today. But there's one or two things that we can extrapolate and that we can apply today in our interrelationships with carers and employees. So the Torah says in chapter 25, Perek Raphael, and it's Pasuk Mem Gimel, the Torah tells us that if we do happen to have a Hebrew slave, lo tidor bo befarech, that you're not allowed to, the translation is you shouldn't oppress him with like hard labor. Usually that's how we translated perach being something which is back-breaking or very, very hard and difficult labor. And the Torah ends off that pasuk, v'yareita melohecha. You should fear your God. I have to see what is the connection. Why does the Torah tell us you're not allowed to work one's eved very harshly, and one has to have fear of Hashem. So first of all, what is the definition of befarech? I mean, how do you define work which is extremely difficult? So Rashi and the Gemara, they basically say that they give two examples which are very interesting, that not so much physically difficult, but that as well, obviously, but something which is psychologically tormenting. Rashi says either that it's useless work or work which there's no limit to it. So the example of useless work is like, for the Rashi says, the master says to his servant, I want you to make for me a cup of tea. He makes a cup of tea, he takes one sip, and then he throws it on the floor. That's considered to be like useless, tormenting work. When a person works or does something, it might be ma'amana, and the person, after having done it, he shows his disdain, he just throws it away. Or, for example, Rashi says that the master says to his servant, what I want you to do is I want you to hoe, for example, this piece of land. And how much how long should I carry on? Well, till I tell you to stop. In other words, the point is, why is it so psychologically damaging? Why is it so gives one such anguish? Because there's no sense of satisfaction. Person can be a slave, he can work for someone very hard, but at least, you see, I built this project, I built this building, I did it almost for nothing, but you know what? It's mine. I contributed. But you just go and say to someone, you know what? Do this till I tell you to stop. That's really backbreaking. So 3 points now. The 1 point is that this applies to an Eved Ivri. But if there's a slave which is a Canaanite, then technically one could do that type of, order them to do that type of work. But the Rambam at the end of Hilchot Kinyan, he makes this very point and he says, you know what? Even though from a strict halachic point of view, a person could that to his Canaanite slave, who's like Canaanite slave is a person who's semi-converted and has to do mitzvot like a woman. So the Rambam says, don't hide behind the technicalities of the law. That's not a Jewish way. The Jewish way is that one doesn't shout at one servant, is not cruel to one servant. The Jewish way is that Midat Chassidut, the Rambam says, is that you adarabba, you give what you eat at the table. That's what your servant or your carer eats at the table. In fact, you give them first. That's the way. That's what it means to be Jewish, and that's what it means to be a person who are the children of Abraham Avinu. That the Rambam says Abraham Avinu put into our DNA that we basically compassionate, and the cruelty, then barbarism that we find. Usually that's like inherent in other nations, but the Jewish people are basically considered to be compassionate people, and that's they have to behave. Now, we said beforehand that the Torah says that you're not allowed to work the slave, the Jewish slave, because you, and it ends off the pasuk, v'yareita melecha. And Rashi says that the reason that we do that is because a person might say, the servant doesn't know if I'm going to chuck it down the sink in a minute. I told him to make a cup of tea, and then, okay, to just keep him occupied, I'm going to take a sip and throw it in the sink. But that's why the pasuk's v'yareita melecha, but Hashem knows. And because Hashem knows, so don't do it. I remember that in South Africa, for those South Africans in the audience, there was like a funny, like a film. It was called Funny People. It was basically one of these films in which there was like a candid camera, a camera which is behind the scenes and always laughing at other people's expense. You know, those type of movies. So they showed a factory, and in the factory there were some people who were on the production line, and they were told to wrap up balloons. So they had to blow the balloons and then wrap it up. And of course, because a balloon is very it's round and it's not solid, so it's very hard to wrap it up delicately. I mean, it takes time. And then the manager comes, and what he does, he makes a stamp on the wrapping, but each time he makes a stamp, it bursts the balloons. And everyone in the audience laughs, and because they see what the basis of the people on the production line, they just can't understand what is this manager doing. But that's exactly a classical example of avodat farech. But let's not speak about extreme cases. Let's speak about something closer at home. One which Rabbi Stornbach and what Rabbi Zilber said, all based on Rabbeinu Yonah in Shar Tshuva, Perek Gimel, Seif Samach. Rabbeinu Yonah lived in the 13th, 13th century, and he says that the Torah speaks about a servant, but it actually speaks to the principles apply to everybody. And Rabbeinu Yonah says that, you know what, also an example of backbreaking or something psychological damaging is to tell someone to do something when you know that they don't want to do it. When you put psychological pressure on a person to do it, something that you know is not your employer, and you ask him to do something, it can be friends, and you put pressure on him to do it when you know that he doesn't want to do it. That falls under avodat parech. And there's two examples that both Rabbi Zilber and Rabbi Sternbach bring, which are very interesting. They're fascinating, I think. Rabbi Zilber says, let's say a housewife is working for Pesach, and the husband's got certain chumrot, he's got certain stringencies, and he asks his wife to do those stringencies in her cleaning. Now, they're not stringencies, they're not the halacha. From a Torah point of view, she's done her cleaning for chometz, everything's fine. That is an example, he says, or could be example of avodat farech. To put on one's wife this extra job, which she doesn't really want to do. She's got enough on her plate on Pesach, on Erev Pesach. And now because of a chumrah, some strict way that you think should be an extra, that there shouldn't be chametz. That's working, and that's an isur of avodat parech. And Sternbach gives something also, and not limited to Pesach. When we've got a chumashim and a sidurim, and what we do is we say, we're too lazy or, we couldn't be bothered, Khalila, to go and take a chumash, to take a sidurim, to put it in the proper place. You know what? There's this one from the shul can do it, and this gabbai can do it, and that's his job. That's avodat parech. That is making a person to work unnecessarily. You could do exactly the same thing. Take 1 minute on the way out, fold one stutters, do this, do that. Right? Be a little bit considerate of it's such a small thing. But that's exactly what the Torah says. Don't overwork people, whether it's one's carers, whether one's employees, whether it's ordinary people. You've got nothing to do with them. But what you do is you sit back and what to do is you make them do extra work because you couldn't be bothered. So what the Torah says to us, right? That's an application. These applications of Lo Tidor Bavarech, it's not doing something which is difficult, but it's doing something which is just like, it's a tirda, it's like a bother. And we don't bother people for nothing. That's the great lesson that the Torah tells us. Kol tov to everybody, and Litraot.